Okay, Mrs. Berkowitz, we're live.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the working session of the Board of Education of March 30th. I'd like to start off, please, with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we even begin with the meeting, I'd like to talk about one thing. We have discussed this amongst ourselves, but this is the first opportunity to be before you and say that we're all devastated at the events that have occurred this week in Atlanta. Just as we were outraged at the events in Pittsburgh over 3 years ago, we are sickened by what has been happening now to Asians in our country. Please know, and I speak for my colleagues as well, that our hearts are broken by these senseless murders and attacks. And if your children need help coping with these events, please know that our schools have guidance counselors and nurses, psychologists and social workers, as well as access to outside professionals. Please reach out if we can help in any way. There is no room for hate in any of our schools, and it will not be tolerated. Thank you. Next, for those of you who are new to our working sessions, I'll explain how they work. These sessions are an opportunity for the board to question the administration about specific line items in the proposed budget. You can follow along online. There are 5 different categories with varied lengths. They are general support, instruction, library and AV, pupil personnel and transportation, and summer programs, community services, and undistributed. I will pause after each section to give you viewers an opportunity to ask any budget-related questions you may have. State your name with your question so that if an administrator doesn't have the information, they can get back to you. To my colleagues on the board, I will call out the page and ask any questions that I have, and please call out stop whenever there's something you want to ask, just as this has always been our practice. And now we begin. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Just want to comment that you can see at the top, we now have 3 auditors. It's required, and you hear the reports generally at board meetings. Next item, John, if you would explain, I will be directing questions for the most part to you unless I identify a different person. For 1325, 4,000, the bond and note expense, if you would just tell the audience why it is lower.
Sure. Thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz. The reason for that is we had a bond offering in 1920. This was the second of 3 serial bond, actually it'll be 4 serial bond offerings. And what that bond and note expense is, it's inside of that code is bond counsel, fiscal advisors, advertising and printing. We don't expect to spend as much money in 21, 22, even though there will be, at the time we put this together, we thought our last borrowing would have been this June of 21, but there will be a smaller borrowing in June of 22 for the remainder of the serial bond issue that was approved by the public back in 2017.
Thank you. Page 4, I have a question about this. For legal services in 2019-20, the expenditures were $344,000. You went down then with what you budgeted for 2021, and now you're back up for the proposed budget, which I personally think may even be too low. Can you just explain that dip?
Yes, it was under budgeted in 2021. This is the legal expenses for our retainer attendance, our attorney attending at board meetings, general inquiries. In looking at the history in that one line in the entire function area of legal and negotiations, we've been spending around 350,000, 344. It goes up and down, but we feel 350 at this point in time should cover what we expect to have in 2021, 21, 22. But as you pointed out, Mrs. Berkowitz, there are a few other, some litigation out there that may cause that number to go up, which we would have to cover with a transfer from another budget line.
Okay, thank you. Next on that same page, 1430, 1610. I notice it's a half a person less in terms of the staff for human resources. Mrs. Kirby?
Yes, good morning, Mrs. Berkowitz and board trustees. Last year, we had a part-time position, which based on the budget concerns, we decided not to fill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Page 5. Page 6. I'm going to stop again for a moment. Mr. Powell, would you just explain the contract that we have, the EPC contract?
Yes, okay. If you look at two codes on this page, 1620, 4051, and 4052. Back in 2007, we entered into what's known as an energy performance contract with Honeywell. And what this is you borrow money to buy equipment and to insulate your buildings to save money. However, there is debt service on the loan that you take out to buy these items, ballast for lighting, boilers and burners for heating. And it was an 18-year contract that had $947,000 in interest and principal for the 19 years. We actually pay the debt service out of this line. It's really out of the savings. What happens is you enter into the contract, you borrow the money, you buy the items, and based on a calculation that Honeywell monitors every year, the savings from putting in those items pays the debt service. So when you look at this line, you have to look at it in conjunction with the debt service expenditures on page 65. And I apologize for jumping up to another page, but if you look at staying on this page, you take that 947 and you divide it in two, which is $473,500. You charge that to the 1651 and the other 473,500 to 1652. If you added those two numbers to the expenditure numbers in 1920, they approximate what you have in your budget. But the New York State Controller says that when you pay debt service, it has to go in specific account codes, and that's why the actual expenditure you will see on page 65 coming out of the 1920 expenditure. So that is a function of the controller's chart of accounts that you reflect all of your debt service payments in the debt service codes at the end. But I just want everybody to know that it wasn't the cost of this energy performance contract was paid for out of the savings of all of the items we put into effect. It will mature in the 24-25 school year.
Thank you. When you turn to page 65, and you'll see it later on, it's a page that speaks of debt service, other debts, transfers, etc. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. This is the first page where you start to see any costs involved with security. You'll see plenty more afterwards, 1620, 2001.
Yes,
Next.
yes, this is, we're buying additional cameras. We have close to 700 cameras throughout the school district right now, and we've had them for a number of years. Unfortunately, like anything technological, there is obsolescence, and we are starting to have to replace some of those cameras. We're just not we haven't budgeted as much as we did in 2021. So the number you're seeing it going down from 240 to 150. But again, the reason for that is just not replacing on a cycle, on a scheduled cycle. We were just not buying as many in 21, 22.
Thank you. On card 7, this continues with discussion about security. You'll notice 1.7 million is committed to additional security as well. Contract security services underneath the licenses. You'll also see on that same page, security supplies, 1620 4571. Those are COVID-19 expenditures for security.
Mrs. Berkowitz, did you want me to comment on those two codes?
If you want to speak
Sure.
also the custodial supplies for $500,000 there also because of COVID.
That is correct. The first number Mrs. Berkowitz alluded to was contract security services. The reason for that jump in the contract, there is language that we must pay prevailing wages to our contract security guards. That's why you see the bump up to the $1.7 million. And back down to the supplies. The reason for that is, of course, we have a number of security devices throughout the district, and you have to buy the supplies to keep those items functioning. And as she pointed out, as Ms. Perkins pointed out, custodial supplies, the disinfectants, the PPE that we expect to have to continue using going into the future, even though more people are becoming obtaining the vaccine, we still have to be ready to protect everybody. So that's why, as she pointed out, the 520 is higher than the 409 for 2021.
And I remind everybody that even though many of our adults will have been vaccinated, our children most likely won't be. We need to continue with these supplies for next year. Page number 8, this is a continuation then of Honeywell, the energy performance contract for the service consultant, if you want to mention that, 4006.
Yes, we've got a couple of codes. We have them in 1620. We still pay Honeywell to monitor the energy performance contract, and a lot of the equipment that was put in, there are service contracts on that. So those are the amounts that you're seeing in these lines. We actually reduced it in the 1620 area because we weren't requiring as much from Honeywell. But also in these lines, in addition to that, we have Broderick and Branch. These are environmental consultants that come in and test for asbestos, air quality, water quality, lead paint. I know a lot of people would say lead paint, but in older facilities, even though we've abated most of it, you can't get everything. Sometimes it's under a lot of layers of paint. So when you do construction, you do repairs, you sometimes unsettle those materials. So we have to have environmental consultants and engineers that we call in from time to time. And there are things that do come up in our structures that we could not anticipate. So we put money in there in the event we have to bring in professionals to address those situations.
And for those who are following along, part of that also is line item 1621 4006. And this is continued then on the next page. Page 9 is more about the maintenance of the plant. Short. Page 10, do you want to explain, Mr. Powell, about how we're moving from time punch clocks to the biometric throughout the district, but how you're
Yes.
filtering it in?
Yes. What that is a number of years ago, like most entities, we were using time cards where when an employee clocked in or clocked out, they would put a time card into a machine. A couple of years ago, we migrated away from that to biometrics, where you put your fingerprint on a sensor pad. And again, because of technology, these clocks have started to reach the end of their useful life. So we are starting the process of phasing them out and bringing in new clocks. So that's what that line is for.
Thank you. I also want to point one thing out. This is the first page that indicates the pupil index. For those who don't understand it, for the elementary school students, the principals are allotted $253 per student. For middle school, $311, and for high school, $337. The pupil index affords the principals to go ahead and assign money to different codes and different needs in their building. It could be supplies, it can be furniture, etc. So you'll see here many times the asterisk for pupil index. Page 11. I want to ask you why there's such a jump in the umbrella liability policy, 1910-4401.
Okay, what's happened here is if you went back a number of years in all of our adopted budgets, we have kept the same appropriation, which is that budgeted number for each one of these lines of insurance. So we've kept them flat because there was always more money in those codes than we needed. However, as you can see, if you were tracking our expenditures, the expenditure number is now starting to approximate what the budgeted number is. I just did not take any money out of there. There is contingency money built into those codes to address other things, either in that area or in other parts of the budget where I might have anticipated incorrectly what we're going to spend for the year. So there is a little cushion in that function area, and especially in that line to the extent of about $20,000.
Thank you. I do want to point one other thing out. On the bottom, you'll see 1950 taxes and sewer assessments for $500,000. And that's imposed upon us by the local jurisdictions. And when you take our budget and divide it by the number of students, the equation then is inaccurate. We've been hearing this for years and trying to explain it. $500,000 for sewer assessments has nothing to do with education. And I'll point this out several times now. Page 12. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Powell, if you could please describe BOCES, what the expenses are. There's almost $1 million here in the budget for BOCES administrative.
Sure, thank you. BOCES is a cooperative that provides educational and support service activities to public school districts. All 56 public school districts in Nassau County are members of BOCES. These two charges here are mandatory. Whether a district subscribes to BOCES for other services that they offer, each one of us are assessed based on our enrollment for these charges. We are required by law to be a member of BOCES, and these charges are mandatory whether you use the other services that they offer or not. We subscribe to BOCES in addition to these services in total $6.1 million. However, again, these two charges are mandatory. Every school district, based on their enrollment, will have a charge in their budget for administrative and rental of facilities for BOCES.
Thank you. BOCES, for those who don't know, is the Board of Cooperative Educational Systems, I believe.
Services.
Okay. That comes to the end of the first section. I'm going to pause now in case there are any questions. Mrs. Langell, will you let me know if there are questions? Dr. Lander?
I do not see any questions.
Okay. I'll move on then to instruction. Page 13. If you would just explain, and I know it's not a large amount, but 2010-1505 curriculum development, the compensation, and the change that it's down to zero.
I would be happy to speak to that, Mrs.
Thank you.
Berkowitz, and good morning, everyone. The history of this code is that we had traditionally budgeted $20,000 for district-wide curriculum writing and separately $40,000 for middle and high school curriculum writing. Effective for the 1920 school year, this code was abolished and two new codes were created, one for elementary only and one for secondary only, which you will see moving forward on pages 20 and 22. And $10,000 was added so that we now have $35,000 budgeted for elementary each year and $35,000 budgeted for secondary curriculum writing each year.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Those will appear later on those two specific items. And once again, 2010-1608. The office staff there is also down. I believe it's half of a secretary's hours.
Yes, at a secondary school, that is correct.
Page 14. Again, these are all pupil index, and you'll see the kind of categories appearing very often. 15. 16. All right, I'm going to stop for a moment here because you'll see in the middle of the page, rental of copy machines. And this is an item you're going to see on a number of pages. Mr. Pell, would you explain the different codes here for this?
Yes. Throughout the district, we have 53 copiers. We have the copier contracts expiring over a 2-year period. That way, we don't have them all out at one time. Each school has a number of copiers throughout their building. So you will see charges for the main office, the guidance office. You'll see them in the libraries, various parts of the building where there could be a function area. So you, again, as you pointed out, you'll see copy machines throughout the budget in the individual function areas and by school. Give you an example, you have 3 over at Baker. You have 1 in the teacher work room left, 1 in the teacher work room right, 1 in the supply room. That's pretty typical for a elementary school. Then you can go to a high school like North Middle School. You'll have 1 in the main office, 1 in the guidance office, 1 located in the cafeteria, 1 located in the library, and 1 in their room 210. So if there is a function area that correlates to each one of those different locations, you will see the copier machine charge reflected there, as opposed to all being bunched into one district-wide code.
Good, thank you. I want to point one other thing out. Ads in the middle of the page. There's a $20,000 allotment in next year's budget. For those who don't know the cost of an ad, we've just now recently had to place ads for a couple of positions. The New York Times charged $9,200, Newsday $4,500, but that was to appear in 2 different weeks. I don't know if everybody's aware of how much the ads actually cost. Okay, page number 17. Page 18. Page 19. Now we start, Ms. Newman, with some of your different things in your category. This is where you were talking also about salary codes being shifted and so on. If you would talk about the elementary STEM activities.
Sure. So with regard to that code 2110-1203, this budget code funds before school activities at the elementary levels, such as Math Olympiads and grade 5 STEM, meaning science, technology, engineering, and math activities. So because of school closings due to the COVID-19 pandemic during the 1920 school year, some of these activities were either abbreviated or never happened at all, which is why the expenditure was only $2,000. However, we are expecting that Math Olympiads and before school STEM activities for grade 5 will resume in September of 2021, assuming it's safe to do so, which is why the proposed amount is back to $11,808.
I just want to point out a couple of the actual expenses. In 17-18, we spent $13,000. 19-20, as you said, $2,000. So 2021, again, $11,808. We have a chart on the next page, a listing of elementary staffing. I'm going to let you explain this also, the projected staffing. Ms. Newman?
Sure. Actually, I don't see that chart coming up.
It's the information for budget card 25.
Right, I just don't see it on the screen.
Okay,
But I can speak to it anyway. So this page is chock full of information about what was budgeted for elementary staffing last year at this time for the 2021 school year, the adjustments needed when COVID protocols were put in place for the creation of the elementary remote program, and additional classroom sections at each school needed to accommodate 6 feet social distancing, and also the projected staffing for the 21-22 school year. So the top portion under adjustments lists the additional positions we needed to hire teachers for this year, as well as district existing positions such as Seek, Science, and Reading Recovery that we repurposed to staff the ERP and additional in-person classroom sections, again, needed to accommodate COVID-19 protocols. At the top of the page, we had originally budgeted for 191.33 positions. And next to the adjustments needed under the total, we added another 24.72 positions, bringing the actual staffing this school year to 216.05 FTEs. Below that, there's a list detailing our projected staffing for the 21-22 school year. And in that list, you can see the elimination of many positions that were added this year to staff the ERP and in-person classroom instruction. So the projected staffing includes the return of Science, Seek, Reading Recovery, and instrumental music teaching positions to exactly those roles for the 21-22 school year, again, assuming it is safe to do so. The projected staffing also includes +1 classroom section at EM Baker, +1 classroom section at JFK, plus 0.2 PE at Lakeville, and 2 contingency positions in case elementary enrollment spikes between now and the opening of school. The bottom line and the easiest way to understand the information is to compare what we had originally budgeted for this school year prior to making COVID require adjustments. So that's the 199.33 positions, to the total number of positions we are projecting for the 21-22 school year, which is the 195.53. So again, it's an increase of 4.2 positions, +1 at JFK, +1 at Baker, 0.2 PE at Lakeville, and 2 contingency positions. I would also like to mention that we do not take the reductions noted lightly at all. We are so grateful to all of the teachers who accepted one-year contract positions this year to help staff the ERP and in-person instruction at our elementary schools. The work of these classroom and special area teachers is valued and appreciated, and we now have a wonderful and strong pool of candidates to consider if we need to do any hiring for the 21-22 school year. I would also like to thank all of the existing Great Neck teachers for their flexibility and dedication in embracing the assignments they were given as general education classroom teachers or general music teachers this school year. It is not easy to make a sudden shift from a specialized position, which is what these teachers had to do this year, and our students greatly benefited.
thank you. In honor of my friends, I'm going to ask a provocative question now. Do you anticipate there being any impact on the fact that we've now been told by the CDC we can have 3-foot distancing as instead of 6-foot distancing between students, not between teacher and student, but between students?
I think what that's telling us is that for the 20, we're budgeting appropriately for the next school year. My hope is that, and maybe Joe can weigh in on this too. It looks like he might want to. Go ahead, Joe.
Good morning. We do anticipate that we would be able to bring students back at the 3-foot social distancing, but there are a lot of other variables in play here and things that we're working out as we speak, basically. We've been talking with the Department of Health this past week, and while the CDC makes a recommendation, it's not something that we automatically embrace. We haven't done that from the beginning. They've made recommendations, and then we've worked with the state and the local Department of Health to make sure that we have all of the processes and procedures in place to have safe schools. So while we do anticipate the social distancing lessening, there are a lot of other variables that we still need to work out.
Thank you, Dr. Hickey. And we are going to work very closely with the Department of Health guidelines to make sure that anything that we can do to bring children back to school will be done in a safe manner for everyone, not just the children who are currently in school, but for children that we may want to welcome back into our buildings. We're currently on a full remote program. And while the CDC did put out a guidelines with regards to children being 3 foot socially distanced in classrooms, there was additional guidance in that document that spoke about the appropriate social distancing required for students in a cafeteria and music classrooms. You know, we also have to think about transportation because we do transport a large number of our students. So there are other issues that we do need to work out, and we will look forward to working with any recommendations that are put forth, like we said, from not only the Department of Health, but I'm sure also the State Education Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the elementary staffing, which Ms. Newman already explained. We have after that, the items regarding parent conference, teachers and enrichment, summer work by teachers, the academic intervention for math, curriculum development, which you started to speak about, Ms. Newman, and you and Dr. Lando can speak to that. And then teacher assistant instruction for elementary. This is a large ticket page. If you would explain that, please.
So just with regard to the curriculum development, the elementary curriculum development, that's the code I was talking about before. You'll notice that it was reduced from 35,000 to 25,000 last year, and when we projected for the current school year, that was in an effort to assist with needed budget reductions at that time. The proposed budget amount of 35,000 for the 21-22 school year represents what we typically spend for curriculum development, as evidenced by the 19-20 school year expenditure of 28,704. Elementary parent conferences at the top is that exactly what it says for before and after school parent teacher conferences. We do offer some enrichment courses before school, and that is indicated on this page as well. Summer work for teachers is for teachers who come in before the opening of the school year in order to get classrooms ready to receive students. Academic intervention services in math are provided to students who need that additional support in mathematics instruction. And teacher assistants at the elementary level instruct and assist with computer instruction and also as needed in classrooms.
Thank you. That's page 20. Next, page 21. I just want to point out this is another very large page, and I'll start now. Dr. Lando, can you explain this, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Berkowitz, and good morning, everyone. As you look at code at the 2110-1300 code, those are all the instructional teachers at the secondary level who are not special education teachers or specialty teachers such as librarians and guidance counselors. And what you'll see is that this year we had 321.55 teachers. We anticipate an increase in enrollment at the secondary level, particularly at South Middle School and at North High School. That necessitates an increase in staffing for next year. However, we watch that very carefully as we review master schedule and course requests for students, a process that is currently in place. We look at every single course offered at the secondary level to determine what the number of sections that are needed. It's not quite as easy, and it's not easy at the elementary level. However, it's easier at the elementary level because for each number of students, you're going to have one whole section of a class and one whole teacher. At the secondary level, there are pieces of teachers that get added course by course, and it creates a challenge. At the middle schools also, we look at that in terms of maintaining teaming at appropriate levels. And there are elements of the master schedules that one domino tips over others. So it's a complex process that we believe that we will be within our budget for this year at 326.45 FTEs for the upcoming year, even with the adjustments that are made for increase in enrollment. Is there another particular code that you would like me to address, Mrs. Berkowitz?
I would like you just to explain, or I will explain, 2110-1303. When we go ahead and take part of the salary, transferring it to another code, there's a reason why. This happens to be for PPS.
Actually, department head administrative teachers, the department heads in our buildings have responsibility for observation and evaluation of all the staff in their departments. And the model that we use in Great Neck is a building-based model, one that I believe to be very, very effective, where our department heads are also teaching practitioners. So there is a stipend for that, and there is a stipend for the supervision of each teacher that is in the building. And that's the accumulated cost of that particular code in all the buildings.
Right. I also wanted to just explain the reason for a transfer is because some of our teachers then have to be allotted to the PPS budget. Dr. Hickey, would you talk about 2110-1307, the homebound teachers, the increase in 2021, as well as 2122 proposed?
Sure. As everybody is aware, we needed to provide instruction to our homebound students this past year because of quarantine. And because of that, we needed to increase that budget code.
Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to that 2110, the partial transfer too. There's also a calculation that we use to calculate how much it costs to educate special education students, and that's how we're reimbursed. So that comes into that transfer there as well.
Good. Thank you. I do want to point out that South Middle School will be seeing 45 additional students for the year to come. These numbers often fluctuate. I had a question next on card number 22, 2110-1337. This has to do with tutorials in the spring and summer, as well as academic intervention. And you can see the increase, and I wanted to know whether or not, Dr. Lando, would you speak about whether or not you anticipate that being enough money?
Yes, I believe that that will be enough money. When you look at the money for that was spent last year and this year, the difference in that is that we did move to a remote process, but I believe that the dollars that are allocated will be appropriate for next year.
Good, thank you. Page 23. I wanted to ask you about line item 2110-1403, Dr. Lando. People feel there were no trips of any sort, no competitions done during COVID. Would you please explain that?
Yes. So, however, we have had an increased expense that we use this code to pay, and that is the screening of students with temperature checks in the morning to come into school, and also because we needed to expand our cafeteria spaces with the 6-foot distancing, we needed additional personnel to be able to supervise lunch hours, and so there are stipends that are paid on an hourly basis for staff to supervise students in those cafeteria settings. So that's why we have some expenses this year under that code.
Thank you. Next, we have a chart. I'm not sure that you have it, but I do want to question one thing. Under instructional hours for Parkville, we had budgeted for this year 895, and it says here the actual for 2021 1854. I believe that's 850. Am I correct?
Right, so this chart does not reflect the increase it appears to show for Parkville Schools' non-instructional paraprofessional hours. It's actually a shift from instructional to non-instructional hours to reflect accurate coding of positions. So this also explains what you just said, Mrs. Berkowitz, the decrease of hours from actual to budgeted on the instructional hours side of that chart.
Thank you. And Dr. Lando, I'd like to refer to North Middle School. as
Yes.
well as North High School, as well as South High School, the increases.
So we have a number of teachers who, because of COVID, have ADA accommodations, and it was in the best interest of the district and the students to have these teachers continue to teach, although from a remote location. So we needed to place someone in the classroom. The persons that we put in classrooms are teaching assistants that are hired on a 1-year temporary basis in order for there to be someone to both supervise the students and control the technology in the classroom while the teachers teach remotely. I must add that this year there are so many schools that needed additional personnel due to COVID that those that were available to be hired were not of the quality that we would have wanted with our students, and therefore it was in the best interest of our students and the district to maintain the personnel with an ADA accommodation.
Thank you. Page 24. This is again a page of pupil index, and I wanted to point out some of the different items. They are smart boards, robotics equipment, musical instruments, and so on. And again, it's at the principal's discretion, and it's reviewed by the cabinet, senior administration. Same thing on card, page 25. Page 26. Page 27. Dr. Landa, I'm going to ask you to please explain the increase in 2110 4,000, the budget from this year and projected for next year as well.
Certainly. So our expenses in the 1920 school year were much lower than they typically are because many of the special events that we send students to take place in the spring and were canceled last year. We are fortunately victims of our students' success in areas such as DECA, robotics, science and math research, our legal competitions and Model UN competitions. Our students have tremendous success, and that's a reflection of their commitment and also the expertise of our teachers that provide that serve as advisors to those. So our expenses for 1920 were much lower than typical. This year, our expenses will again be lower because last year's budget had to be created before we knew whether or not we would be in school. However, typically, this is a code that gets expended fully due to the success of our students and the competition teams from all different schools.
Thank you. Page 28. Page 29. I just want to explain, when you see mileage allowance, many of our staff work in different buildings and go back and forth, and that's the reason for that line item. Page 30. This is one of the things that we referred to earlier when we did page 16. The rental of copy machines, you will see falling under different codes. Page 31. Page 32. Dr. Lanza, would you just explain about secondary supplies, 2110 4500? Why this is separate from the actual listing by school?
Yes, we keep a separate listing because there are times that there may be a district initiative that we're not, that develops during the course of the year, and there may become something that's a special need of the schools that is necessary at that time. So we put money, a little bit of money in reserve. When you think about it across the 4 secondary settings, it's about $2,500 per building, plus what we might need at Village. So that's a hedge against things that we don't know necessarily whether or not we would have to spend the money, but we'd rather have the money in the budget than not in the budget.
Great, thank you. Page 33. I'd appreciate it if either Mr. Powell or Dr. Lando would explain the allocation of money for elementary schools and secondary schools for testing.
I'll start out. Dr. Lando can come in if he likes. We did some extensive research on this to find out where we came up with these allocations. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer why it's only $1 at the elementary school and $400 per school at the secondary school. But I will certainly meet with personnel internally and make adjustments to these numbers if they're required, because I wasn't able to find the actual rationale when this first started out.
And
It's
as
hard
stu-
to understand $1 per student elementary and 400 per school secondary.
True.
Dr. Pendo?
I don't know where that practice began. I would have to do some research to learn whether or not it began before Ms. Newman and I arrived about 14 years ago. I do know that the testing that takes place would be for specific testing materials that might be needed by the reading or TESOL teachers that are particular to their content areas. And so that money is provided and available to them.
Thank you. Page 34. There are two items here that I wish to point out and explain. They are 2110 4800 and 2110 4800 further down. One is K to 6, one is 7 to 12, and they come to about $200,000 for textbooks. We abide by the principle of permissible accommodation. By that, I mean whatever we are permitted to allocate and accommodate private schools, we do so. And we do that willingly, lovingly, with full support, because the children who attend these private schools and parochial schools are still our children. Their parents are our taxpayers, and certainly the students are our children. So that's why you will see added onto this page, and you'll see it come up later on as well, for transportation, for support services, but this figure happens to be 200,000 of the $578,000. Next, page 35. Two things I wanted to talk about. Mr. Powell, 2110 4900. If you would explain this about BOCES again.
Okay, again, BOCES is a cooperative that all public school districts are required to be a member of. It depends how much money is spent by each district. Same thing with Great Neck, depends on what services that we subscribe to BOCES for. But the reason BOCES is popular, it's much more economic for BOCES to provide a service like, say, OC-Ed. There are many aspects of OC-Ed. There's culinary arts, there's mechanical, plumbing, cosmetology, things like that. So we send our students over there for the services that they offer, because we may only have 3 or 4 students that want that particular service, which would not be economic for us to hire a teacher to have 4 students in there. But when you add up all of the students in all of the public school districts that say want culinary arts, then BOCES can offer that service to all of us. And then we get some BOCES aid as from New York State. They will actually pay aid to you to a certain level, not dollar for dollar, for the services that we subscribe from BOCES for. So what you see, if you look at the account codes on this page, the 4900 is the object. Throughout our budget, anything with a 4900 is a BOCES code. So these are the many of the BOCES codes that we subscribe to.
Thank you.
Mrs. Berkowitz,
I'm
if you
going to draw
don't mind.
attention one moment to one item in particular, 2110 4900 066.
Perfect.
You'll
So-
see we went from an expense of $6,000 in 2019-20 to $95,000 being proposed now for 21-22. And that has to do with security cost of smart cards, etc. I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Dr. Prendergast?
Absolutely not. I'm actually grateful that you brought that up, Mrs. Berkowitz, because I think it's important for the community to know. 2 years ago, we introduced the scholarship kiosks, where all of our high school students receive school ID badges, where they literally had to swipe in and out of school in terms of attendance and for security purposes. And now for September, we're expanding that opportunity with our work through scholarship to both of our middle schools. So thank you for bringing that up, because that money is going to cover the cost of the setup, the printing of the ID cards, and that we'll have multiple kiosks set up at each of the buildings as well as, printing stations. So in case we have an issue with a child having lost or misplaced their ID badge. But we're now going to be expanding, like I said, a very successful program that piloted at the high school to the middle schools for September. And that will just be another layer of added safety for students and staff alike.
And it was very wise that we did this in stages to see whether or not it worked at the high school level. And because it has, we've now pushed this down to the middle schools to do it there as well.
Thank you.
Page 36, Dr. Hickey, this is your page, all $37 million of it at the bottom.
Thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz.
Sure. Some of the items I want to talk about are 2250, 1288. That's teacher assistants, instructional at the elementary level. The increase also in 2250, 1388, which is teaching assistants, instructional secondary. Those are first two that we can cover.
So I could talk about both of those at the same time. That
Sure.
increase was due to an increase in sections at the secondary level and an increase in one-on-one teaching assistants at the elementary level. The secondary level, the year prior to that, I was a little too conservative in my budgeting. So we needed to make up for that and increase that appropriately.
Thank you. Line item 2250, 1514, the exceptional need cost went down. What you're allocating? Can you just explain that?
So we're budgeting, if you look at last year's budget, we had a little bit too much money in that code. So we're budgeting it more appropriately to expenditures.
Good, thank you. Also, I'd like you to talk about 2250, 1590, summer work by teachers. There's a big change and a big variable there. In 2019-20, we expended 9,000. It was budgeted for 2021 at 175,000. For this coming year, it's proposed at 75,000.
So there was a compression of codes on that. We used to have several codes where we budgeted for summer school. That 2021 budget is over budget, and that 21-22 is more accurately budgeted with those compressed codes.
Thank you. Also 2250, 1688, the paras, non-instructional. There's an increase over what was budgeted for 2021 in the proposed budget.
That's just to meet the needs of the students in the buildings. We needed to increase by 2.42% to 2.4 FTEs.
Thank you. There's another item here with a variable amount, 2250, 4010.
So 2250, 4010, if you look at the 1920 expenditures, the budget for 1920 was closer to $2 million. So while it does look like a large variation there, that was due to COVID that we did not spend those funds. So it really goes from 1,998,000 to 2,018,000 and then up to the 2.35 to 2,350,000. In that 2,350,000 is the funding for a new relationship that we're going to have with Northwell Health to open up a behavioral urgent care center. We're going to partner with nearby school districts, and that for next year, we are anticipating increased mental health needs in the district, and that will allow not only our public schools, but our private school students to have access to a center that will evaluate, counsel, and treat those students. So we're looking forward to partnering with Northwell and our neighboring school districts in order to be able to bring that service to, like I said, not only our public, but our private school students in district.
Thank you. You gave me a great segue. 2250, 4701, the tuition to private schools. If you'd explain that, Rise.
Yeah, so I'd like to combine that one with the BOCES full-time class. Those are the two lines where we have children that go out of district. We had a large increase this past year. We had over 20 additional students go out of district. We usually have around 40. This past year, we have approximately 60, 62. Those are very expensive students. The tuition is very expensive. Those are our highest needs students. To give you an example would be like a student going to the Milneck School for the Blind, or a student attending Summit School, which is a school for children that have severe emotional needs. So those are children we're not able to service in district, while we do service everybody in district that we can. And we've made great efforts over the years to bring people back from, bring our students back from BOCES. And we've done that in great numbers. And we've really developed our intensive needs programs in district. We can't always service every child in district. And when that happens, sometimes we have to go out of district. Occasionally we even have to go out of state. And we have done that as well. So those are those two lines, and those are the increases that you see there.
Thank you. I think that the title might be a little misleading because people may see this as tuition to private schools. It's really tuition to specialized schools. And perhaps next year can be written differently on this page.
So they are specialized schools, and they're state approved schools too. So when you see private school, that's a New York State approved school so that we can get aid on that student.
Right. Right. Thank you. 2250, 4900. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about this? It's the BOCES regular occupational ed.
The BOCES regular occupational ed, hold on one second.
Sure, 2250, 4900.
Again, that code was underspent in 2019-20. So when you're seeing that variation from the 131 to the 366, the 366 is the more appropriate number.
Right. And underneath it is the intensive occupational ed.
That 207 is more reflective of where we need to be as far as what our appropriate expenditures will be.
Thank you. 2250, 4900, 065, BOCES full-time class.
So that's the same explanation as the tuition for the private schools. We have state approved private schools that we send kids out to, and then we also have BOCES programs. When we're looking to place a child, first we'll look into a BOCES program. If there's not a suitable placement in BOCES, then we go to a state approved school. So the numbers that I was talking about before, those extra 20, are split between the tuition for private schools and the full-time BOCES classes.
Thank you. And the last item on this page, 2250, 4900, 070, the vocational assessments.
Last year, we didn't spend money based upon COVID, and the 4,500 is an appropriate number for that budget line.
Thank you. Bottom line, I just want to point out, this is a budget that increased by about $2 million. The needs are larger, the enrollment is larger. People often move to this community because of the services that are provided that are necessary. And then we have a chart. I will pause now for any questions. Ms. Langell, would you let me know if there are any?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Berkowitz. A question. Could you please explain how much is budgeted for the robotics club in North Middle and North High, and how is it related to the amount budgeted for this purpose in the South schools?
Ms. Langell, I'll be glad to field that question. If you look at budget code 2110-1306, it is on page 21. You'll see that last year, actually for this year and for next year, we broke out the stipends that are paid to our robotics advisors. And the reason is that robotics is really a specialty that when we look at it, that it is a little bit different than some of our other activities for students. We have enough funding in that for 2 teams at each of our middle schools. So our funding for advisors at the middle schools is exactly the same. We have funding for the middle level robotics team at North High School because North High School has not yet moved up to what is known as FIRST Robotics. And then we have funding for a full FIRST Robotics team at South High School. At such time as North High School evolves to or moves to participating in a FIRST Robotics competition, then we would be able to adjust the stipend to what is paid to the FIRST robotic competition at South High School. So it's based on the level of competition that the school is currently involved in. I do want to point out that although not that North High School's team, the middle level team, won a competition and hosted a competition at its school. Not this year, obviously, but last year. And it was a remarkable event for them where they came in first in one of the rounds and were a team captain in another of the rounds. So we also have within that code money for a district facilitator, someone who helps oversee and coordinate the activities to make sure that what we're doing in the schools is balanced and to provide support for them as they move forward.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, I believe it's related to the first question. Would it be appropriate to have mandatory robotics and hands-on STEM lessons in middle schools and elective in high schools? My child is learning important life skills, how to wash dishes in 6th grade, but I think it would also be valuable to learn how to fix a dishwasher or a chair.
So I'll answer this as well. Technology education in each of our schools, each of our middle schools varies just a little bit based on programs that evolved over time and under the site-based approach to things. However, all our students are involved in the problem solving that goes along with STEM activities. And there is an exposure in the technology classes, if not necessarily directly to something like Lego robotics or robotics, the concept and team building that goes along with the problem solving with robotics. And as I'm looking at the question, I just want to make sure that I answer all parts of it. The other thing is that we do have hands-on activities in our science classes as well, and that is part of STEM. And you'll also, when you look at the problem solving that goes along with mathematics, our math teachers also create problems and hands-on mathematical activities. So there is hands-on work. When you get to the question of repairing, when you get to the skill to how to wash dishes with a sponge is one of the things that was listed in 6th grade. So we do have an excellent family and consumer science program for all students, something that the state has created some leeway that other districts are doing away with, and we are not, because we believe in its value. The idea of being able to fix a dishwasher or a chair, that's something that students can do more on an elective basis. The demand for those courses over time waned more at North High School, so there are not the same level of technology-based classes there. But at South High School, the interest in those classes continued, and so there are classes along those lines at South High School. It is one of the differences between the two schools in terms of their programmatic offerings, but it evolved based on student interest and demand over time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
No further questions.
Thank you. I'll move on now to library and AV. Page 37. Mr. Powell, I see the office staff for the library media center is down. Can you just explain that?
Yes, they did not need an additional person, so that's why you're seeing the reduction from 4.5 FTEs to 4. It's just we're fortunate that we have supervisors in our district that don't just keep things that they don't need. Looking at their operation, they determined that there wasn't a need for that additional half person.
Thank you. Okay, page 38. I'm pointing out again the rental of copy machines appearing in all different codes. I'm going to go quickly through the pupil index cards. 39, 40, 41. Mr. Powell, would you just explain this about the state aid at the bottom per pupil?
Yes, there are a number of categories in state aid that are dependent upon how much money you spend up to a certain amount. So on this particular page, you see $6.25 for library materials. There's a $14, I believe, and 98 cents for computer software, $58 for textbooks. This is, you multiply these per pupil amounts by the number of qualifying students, and that's the maximum amount that the state will reimburse you for. So we always make sure that we have enough money in these codes so that we at least max out what the state will pay us.
Thank you. Page 42. Educational TV. This is a commitment that we've made to this program, I would say 30 years ago, probably. Dr. Lando, would you just explain the $50,000 additional in this proposed budget?
Yes, that additional cost actually comes because the TV studio is so busy that we needed to provide additional support. And so you'll see additional support in terms of a slight increase in teaching assistants, that's the paraprofessional. And you will also see a slight increase in the Ed TV staffing. And that is, I don't want to call it release time, but it's non-instructional time provided to Mr. Zahn, who is the Ed TV, the Director of Educational Television. I don't know of a school district that has a program that meets the one that ours does. It's one that has expanded over time to North Middle School and is growing at North High School as well. The South High School students take advantage of the studio that's physically present in South Middle School. And quite honestly, the awards that that program earns on a national basis are remarkable, and it actually wins awards in competitions where there are college programs submitting materials. So our students have a second to none experience in the TV studios of our district.
Thank you. I agree. Page 43. 44. Ms. Langell, I think I know the answer, but are there any questions from this section?
No, there are not.
Thank you. I'll move on. 45. I'd appreciate it if you please would elaborate about the changes in the attendance here for 2805-1610. And then I will speak to 2805-4001 as well. Mr. Pell?
2805. Okay. The attendance, which is our, in combination with our registrar's office, in anticipation of a retirement, we are adding an additional person in there to help out with the volume of work that's going on. And then when you go down 2 more lines, the residency monitoring service, we have been very diligent in tracking down students who go to our schools that do not reside here. So what's happened is, I believe, probably the reputation of us being aggressive in going after those illegal students has required us not to spend as much money. As you can see, even though 1920, an abbreviated year by 1 quarter, we didn't spend as much money. So going forward in formulating the 21-22 budget, we just don't anticipate spending as much.
Thank you. The benefits of this service far outweigh the cost. We've been told for years the accusation, excuse me, false accusation that there are children here who do not reside in this community. If anybody knows of such, please let us know this. You can let us know anonymously if you wish, and this will be investigated. But we have absolutely been able to keep that down thanks to this residency monitoring service, etc. Next, I just want to ask a question about guidance. I think we need to keep an eye on this number with everything that's been going on. Again, COVID related, remote instruction related, etc. So I'm just making an editorial comment here about the 2.4 million. It's flat for now, but there may be an increase in that line. 46. If you could explain 2810 4000-096. Dr. Lando, I believe that you could probably speak to that one. The
Yes,
guidance counselor college
both,
visits.
both myself and Dr. Hickey, this is crisis counseling services for dual language crisis counselors that have particular expertise in both dual language
No,
and...
I'm talking right now about the college visits.
Oh,
Guidance
I'm
counselor
sorry.
college visits first.
I apologize.
I will
It's the
get to the
4,000,
other,
not the
I
4010.
assure you.
The college visits, we make dollars available for our counselors to make visits to a variety of colleges throughout the country in terms of establishing relationships and seeing firsthand what the experience might be for students. And so while that I don't expect that code to be used very much this year again due to travel restrictions, in the past we've had counselors go as far as Stanford in California to schools in the Carolinas and Florida, really across the United States to try to gain a better understanding and establish a relationship with their offices such that when our students apply, they know best whether or not it fits our students, first and foremost. And number two, how to make sure that that student is supported in a way that they demonstrate the skill set that matches them with the particular colleges of interest.
Thank you. 2810-4010-096, the Crisis Counseling Outside Consultants. Dr. Hickey, would you take that one, please?
Sure. So several years ago, the mental health team at one of our schools approached me with a concern about a very specific population that they had in the building, which were students that were coming to us from out of the country. And they were coming with some severe trauma before they got here. And they asked for assistance in working with those students. So we were able to contract with Family First Services, which is an outside counseling group that specializes in crisis counseling for bilingual students. They've worked with us now for the past year. They've been very successful working with those students, and we will continue to hopefully work with them to serve the needs of that population.
Thank you. Page 47, again, rental of copy machines. Page 48, Dr. Lando, if you would speak about 2810-4519. It's a large ticket item.
Yes, so college boards and national merit tests, these are a reimbursed expense for the district. So when students take these tests, they pay the district then pays the college board and the PSAT for the students to take these tests. So any money that's budgeted is budgeted in anticipation of a revenue as well.
Thank you. I want to explain also that in that code of standardized tests, it is partially offset by student fees. Page 49. Page 50, Dr. Hickey first, 4815-1575, the registered nurses. You've upped the position a tiny bit by 0.20.
Yeah, we increased somebody to a full-time position. Actually,
Thank you.
we increased somebody one day. I'm sorry, that wasn't to a full-time position, but we increased them one day of service. We've had a lot of needs over the past year with the nurses, with the students and with the nurses working with them. They have been instrumental as a group in helping us manage the COVID situation. I'm sure that not everybody realizes it, but the nurses are involved in some type of COVID type situation, whether it's identifying and quarantining or processing a positive case, almost on a daily basis. So they've done an incredible job this year, and I publicly would like to thank them for all their hard work.
Good, thank you. The next item, 2815-2001, that is new medical equipment. I just wanted to point that out. And then I'd like to speak to 2815-4000. This again is grade neck children who are attending school elsewhere in other districts here. That $125,000. Dr. Hickey, would you also speak to 2815-4001 medical services?
So we've been looking at our medical services over the past several years. We historically had 3 individuals that were working for us in the district, and we took a look at them about a year or 2 ago when we were approached by Northwell to consolidate those services and partner with them. So a portion of those services was consolidated at that time. And then due to a resignation, we needed to go out and find another service provider this past year. So we were able to contract with Mount Sinai South Nassau at a great savings over our previous expenditures.
Thank you. Page 51. I wanted to just point something out. 2815-4070. 2815, 4500. And then at the bottom, 2815, 4900. Once again, these are payments to private schools. We do this lovingly, willingly. Everything that we can by law provide, we do. But again, when people go ahead and take our budget number, divide it by the number of full-time students in our public schools, it's an inaccurate equation. Page 52, psychologists. Editorial comment from me about 2820, 1577. I hope this will be an adequate number post-COVID. I'm nervous about this. Dr. Hickey, do you think it's an accurate amount? Or,
Can you tell me which line you're looking at again?
sure, 2820, 1577 on page 52. The psychologist, the
Mhm.
amount is staying the same as the expenditure in 1920.
Yeah, so we're trying to maintain those lines. As you know, we could always use additional psychological help, but given the fact that we are contracting with Northwell for the additional mental health services, I think that we can hold that line steady for now.
Good, thank you. Mr. Powell, would you just explain once again the partial salary for both items 2820, 1577 and 2820, 1610, which are transferred to another code?
Yes, Dr. Hickey alluded to it earlier. There's something known in state aid formula. It's called STAC, a system to account for cost on a special ed student. We get a certain amount of money based on our aid ratio. The more money we spend for a special ed student, we get reimbursed to a certain point. It's not dollar for dollar, but it's very important that we properly reflect all of the costs that go into educating a special ed student, because when that calculation is made, we will get some of that money back up to our aid ratio. So you see it here, as you pointed out. You see it in the 2110 area. You also see it a little earlier for some of our assistant superintendents, our director of physical education and recreation. We take a portion of their time that they spend for special ed students to properly account for what it really cost us to educate a special ed student in the district.
Good, thank you. 2825, 1580. I believe that we're anticipating money from a county grant. Have we heard anything further about this?
Yes, we still anticipate receiving, Dr. Hickey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut in on your area, but you want to?
No, go ahead, John.
Okay, yeah, we filed paperwork with Nassau County that requires us to show a certain level of expenditures, and we expect to get that $75,000 back in the 21-22 school year. 75,000 of what we spend. It's not dollar for dollar, but we will get some of that money back.
Great. And on the bottom, 2850, 4,000. This is for the printing of all secondary school newspapers. We'll have the printing in the budget.
It's newspapers and literary magazines. Some do it with BOCES and some do it from a different contracted service. That's why you see some appear in one code and others appear in this code.
Good, thank you. Page 53, interscholastic athletics. This is the supervision for contests as well as coaching services. Mr. Powell, would you please discuss this?
Which page again? I'm sorry, I was looking at something else. What
Page 53 at the top, interscholastic athletics, 2855, 1510, and 2855, 1512. The
Yes,
numbers went up from the expenditures of 1920 to the 2021 budget and remained the same then for the 21-22 proposal.
yes. As you will see throughout our budget for 1920, because of what happened with COVID from March 13th on, a lot of what we normally would have expended for that last quarter of the year, we did not. That's why those numbers are down. But basically what it is the description that when we engage in interscholastic sports, we have to pay for the supervision, the coaching, and the personnel that engages in doing the supervision for those sports. So again, we're going back up anticipating that we will have a normal year in 21-22. At least we're crossing our fingers and hoping that that's what happens. But we have to anticipate that taking place, or else we would run short if it did happen and we did not have the money in the budget.
Thank you. Page 54. Page 55. Once again, in case anybody joined us late, Mr. Powell, if you would explain about both these services, because this code alone is $250,000.
Yes, most districts subscribe to BOCE services for interscholastic, interscholastic sports. As you can see, service fee, entry fees, officials, the officiating at your football games, your basketball games, baseball, things like that, the umpires. This is what these numbers are. As you can see, we did not spend again that much in 1920 because the spring sports season did not take place, but we're anticipating again a full schedule next year, and that's what those fees are from BOCES. Again, it's much more economic to go through BOCES than it would be for us to go out on our own and hire these people as independent contractors.
Thank you. Page 56. I just want to make a point first about 55, 10, 16, 51. There are 8 bus drivers, 3 substitute bus drivers, 2 dispatchers, and 1 mechanic as part of that $1.1 million line item. And I'd like to get to the bottom, the garage. There's a big difference between what was actually spent in 1920 to what is budgeted for 2021 and proposed budget for 21-22.
Okay, again, 1920, you have to remember it was not a normal year. There are additional funds in those lines. You have to understand with transportation, we're very liberal in our ability to address individual transportation needs from our parents. So we do have contingency funds built into a number of line items in the transportation area. And that happens to be one of them, gas, oil, tube, lube, and down below the supplies and materials, but they're also in other line items. So that's why you see the difference there. And again, if we have to add a route or have to put a bus out there to transport a student before we can arrange the contract with an outside contractor, we have to have the ability to do that and have to have extra money for that.
Next, Dr. Hickey, would you just explain, I believe the chart is not going to be up, but can you explain the difference with the special ed bus aides and the public school bus aides? Out of district, there are many more.
So children on their IEP, often children will get an aide assigned to them. So that aide is assigned to that specific child based upon the IEP, which is different than a bus aide that is assigned to a bus.
Thank you. Page 57. I want to point out over $14 million is being proposed in the 21-22 budget for transportation, of which $6 million is for private and parochial schools, both large buses and mini buses and vans. Mr. Powell, would you add anything at all about the bus company and the change?
Yes,
of bus companies?
Again, going back to 1920, you see that because of the abbreviated year, not as much was spent. However, what happened last year, we ended up having to pay the bus companies for that last quarter of the year, even though the buses were not running. What happened was when we went out on March 13th, we did not know if we were going to come back to school in the spring. We had anticipated, not knowing the extent of the COVID-19 pandemic, that perhaps we might have been able to come back right after the spring break. So we made an arrangement with the bus company that they would keep their buses ready, insured, licensed, mechanically correct their bus drivers on payroll so they wouldn't quit and file for unemployment insurance. So we agreed to pay them to have those buses ready. Had we not done that, and they would not have been in a position if we had started school back in April of 2020. I know we did not, but at the time we did not know that. However, the district successfully negotiated with the bus company based on the fact that we ended up paying them for April, May, and June, that they would give us a $1 million credit in the 2021 school year. So what they did in the months of September, October, November, and December, they took $250,000 off in each one of those months. That equals the $1 million credit. It was a hot topic item with every school district, probably in New York State, whether to pay for that last quarter of the year because those buses weren't running. But in our particular instance, because of our heavy dependence on an outside contractor, we had to make that arrangement. And we were fortunate through the efforts of some people in our district to get that $1 million credit for this school year.
Good, thank you. Come to the end of another category. Are there any questions?
Yes. Would the crisis counseling now be redundant with the Northwell program or not?
Dr. Hickey?
No, it wouldn't be redundant. They are similar but different types of counseling. So the crisis counseling center is just what you hear in the name. That the child that is in immediate crisis would be able to go to that center. The ENL counseling is counseling that where they have built a relationship with the students and the families, and it's ongoing counseling. So they're similar but different.
And the last question is, what is the revenue received from the College Board?
Okay, unfortunately, in this presentation, we don't show the revenue page, but the budget booklet that we put out on February 26th, on page 3, we have a revenue line called student fees and charges and Princeton review. In that code are those fees that the students pay towards testing. We collected in 1920, even though some of these things did not take place, $264,274. We are budgeting for 2021, $250,000 for that line. Not all of that is for testing, but a good part of it is.
And if I might add, it's also a partial cost to offset the costs of administering the exam that are district costs that are not actually borne by the College Board. So it goes into the general fund, and it's a partial offset to other costs for the district, not just the cost of the tests themselves.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
No more questions.
Okay, we move on to the last section then. Page 58. You'll see now we begin talking about some of the regular programs that we have in the district and some of the extra programs that we have. 59. And again, on the bottom, you're going to see the expenditures versus the revenues. And the budget is flat. You'll see on the bottom of the community education program. Mr. Powell, do you have a comment about this?
Yes, it's just
Salaries.
in terms of salaries, you mean?
Well, instructional salaries is quite a change in 2335, 1540, 094.
Yes, we not knowing how many people are going to subscribe to our services, we have to budget in anticipation of offering a certain number of classes, and in many cases, if there's not enough participants enrolled, we will not run the class, but we have already made the budget. So again, 1920, not a good year to do a lot of comparing with because we had to shut down in the spring. So that number is below what we would normally spend for instructional salary. So I wouldn't, even though that's the column that we have in here, not a good year for comparisons because of what happened. But again, we normally have a little more budgeted than we plan to spend because we really don't know exactly what's going to take place.
Thank you. Page 60. Page 61. 62. Dr. Prendergast, do you want to say anything about the summer programs?
Yes, thank you,
With
Mrs.
summer
Berkowitz. As I had mentioned at our last board meeting, we are very excited that this summer we will be offering summer enrichment, summer recreation, high school summer school program, as well as supporting our special education extended school year programs. Information will be sent out to parents right after the break in early April, so that information can be provided with you with regards to the courses that are being offered, and we'll let the community know when we will be opening the registration window in advance due to COVID restrictions, and we will be monitoring, obviously, social distancing protocols as required by the Department of Health. And depending what that will be in the summer remains to be seen, but we will be very mindful of the enrollment numbers because we want to make sure that we can keep our staff and our students healthy and safe during that period of time. But we are very excited, our staff, as well as I'm sure our students and parents, to know that once again, our very popular summer programs will be made available to our community in July and August.
Great, thank you. Next, page 63. I have a comment here because I think there's a real misnomer about 7140, 4011. It says consultant services for the recreation program. These are the people who are teaching the different courses. Page 64. Mr. Powell, I believe that you need to speak about the TRS, ERS, health insurance, etc.
Yes, this is a page where a lot of district money is expended. Up top, beginning with employees retirement system, teachers retirement system. Actually, the next page after gives you a little explanation on what the actual employer contribution rate is. It is going up. ERS went up from 15% to 16.2. The TRS, I think, went up from 9.53 to 9.8. This, of course, is all dependent on the asset allocations in their retirement systems, how much money's tied up in equities or stock, how much is in bonds, how much is in real estate, direct correlation to inverse relationship to how well the market does. The better the market does, the lower the contribution from the employer is needed. But you must keep in mind that these are multiple cost-sharing retirement systems. All of the close to 700 school districts participate in the TRS system. The ERS system consists not only of the support personnel in school districts, but all of your towns, villages, counties, state workers. There is a police and fire person component of that retirement system also. And although we can control how many the amount of salaries that get applied to those contribution rates, we don't have any control over how much they go up and down. So we're subject to outside agencies on that. Social Security, of course, FICA and Medicare. The wage base for Social Security goes up every year. Medicare is unlimited. However, this and health insurance, which we'll get to in a minute, are difficult numbers to budget for because they're calendar year programs. So what happens is the new rates come out in January. So we know how much it's going to be for the first half of our next fiscal year, meaning from July 1st, 2021 through December 31st of 2021. However, for the second 6 months of 22, which is the second half of our fiscal year, we don't know what that number is going to be. So we always have to be careful in what we budgeted, because not knowing we could get caught there pretty hard. Social Security wage base has been going up 3-4% every year, but we factor that in. We just don't know exactly what that's going to be. Then there's workers' comp, the fourth line down. There's a sizable $300,000 increase there. Unfortunately, under COVID and other work conditions, people are going out on compensation. As the title indicates, workers' compensation. They're normally ruled in favor of the worker. We are self-insured here, so we do save money. We don't have to worry about an insurance company providing the administrative services and having the profit motive there, but we do have to have an administrator administer the program. But again, we're self-insured, so because of our size, it's just more economic for us to do that. Then there's group term health insurance, which is the largest line item on this page. Another calendar year program. This one is scary for us from the standpoint, after an event like COVID-19, with more and more people utilizing medical facilities, we expect that number to go up a lot in January of 2022. These last 2 calendar years, it didn't go up hardly at all for 2020, and then it only went up 2% for 21. And again, we only know what the first half of our year from July through December. So we're anticipating could be a large increase in 22. You don't really see it in the line because we do have contingency money built in to health insurance. So whatever that increase would be, we would absorb it beyond the 3.5% increase that we factored into that line. We also, down at the bottom, the Medicare reimbursement, you see a $400,000 increase there. What that is for our retirees, the Medicare Part B premium that gets deducted from their Social Security. By contract, we have to reimburse them for that. However, that's on a increasing scale. The more money somebody makes, the greater they have to pay for Medicare services. So the deduct is larger, and because we have to reimburse them for the deduct, the expense becomes ours. So those are the major material increases on this page. But as you can see, if you took the increase from this page and the increase in our wages and new hires, it accounts for almost 74% of the entire increase of like $10.7 million for our 21-22 budget over 2021.
Thank you. 2 things I wanted to point out. The expenditures in 1920 versus the proposed budget for 21-22 shows an increase of 10.4 million. Mr. Pell, I'm going to ask you one question. For some people in our audience who may not know this, would you please explain some of the different initials, ERS, TRS, BNG, SAGES, GNTA, OSA, just to be transparent? Thank you.
Certainly. Okay. ERS is Employees Retirement System. TRS, Teachers Retirement System. SAGES is our supervisors and administrators unit. The actual name is called Association of Supervisors and Administrators of Great Neck Educational Staff. That's kind of what the SAGES initials stand for. Then you have B&G, Buildings and Grounds. GNPA, Great Neck Teachers Association. OSA is Office Staff Association. And administrative TSA means Tax Sheltered Annuity. What that is in their contract, they're entitled to a certain payment by the district for a tax sheltered annuity. The insurance trust fund, GNTA and OSA, that is a trust that saves money. Their administrators, office staff, and the teachers are in that fund. And optical insurance, all contractual numbers here, $500 for each administrator for optical. Dental is a straight insurance policy that we have, for our members there, depending upon when you became an employee in the district. There are different contribution percentages from the school district, but that's what those initials stand for.
Thanks very much. Page 65. This is the page that Mr. Powell was referring to much earlier. If you would just speak a little bit again about the debt service,
Certainly.
the general fund and fund balance.
Yes. Okay. As we talked about earlier in the beginning on the energy performance contract, you have to go to that the second section on there, which is 9789 other debt. You see expenditure numbers in there far exceeding what you see budgeted. The reason for that, again, is that expenditure of $947,000 is the debt service on the energy performance contract that gets paid out of the savings from all of the improvements we made back in 2007. So if you take from that $1,321,061 in 1920, you deduct from that the $947,000, that comes out to $374,000, which compares right with what we're budgeting for 2020, 2021, and 21-22. And that $440,000 is for our iPad initiative, going out and buying iPads for our students. And right after that, you see interfund transfers. There's debt service there also. The first line, of course, is not debt service. That is the amount of money that we have to pay for our students who have deficit balances in our lunch fund. It doesn't get charged to the lunch fund. There's a law that does not require does not permit the lunch fund to cover the bad debt expense that's there for students who charge their lunch on credit but don't pay for it. And the reason for that, we will not let any student in this district go hungry. We have a practice that no matter what the situation is, we will feed a student, which is a great thing. This district has many great services, but that is one of them, that no child will go hungry in Great Neck while they're attending school. So that's what that amount of money is. But the debt service, principal and interest, those are the debt service payments on the serial bonds that we are issuing according to the 2017 capital proposition that was passed by the district. The authorization was for $68 million. We issued 34 million in June of 19. We did another 12 million, I believe, another 9 million in June of 20. We're looking to do another 12 in June of 21 coming up, and then the remaining 10 million in June of 22. But that's where those interest payments are accounted for. And then when you see 31st issue, that's the 31st issue of bonds in the history of this school district.
Thank you. I just wanted to point one thing out because you spoke about the food service. We have made a valiant attempt to try and recoup this money that's owed. We also have a policy that there will be no lunch shaming. So we wanted people to be aware of that. Are there any questions for this section?
Yes, Mrs. Berkowitz. What are the examples of the field trips?
I can
Okay,
take
I'll
that.
start with that. I believe that the field trips that are noted on those budget pages have to do with community education programs. And while we do budget initially for those proposed trips that may or may not take place, depending on the COVID environment, they certainly will be offset in the revenues that will be received by those students or recipients through community education that attend those trips.
Okay, the next question. Is it possible to deduct from the operating budget figure all the expenses that do not cover the K-12 in-district students or that are reimbursed from fees such as adult ed, community ed, summer rec, etc., so there can be a better understanding of per pupil spending?
Yes, as a matter of fact, on the state aid website, the New York State Education Department website under state aid, there is what's known as a non-resident tuition worksheet that actually takes all of the expenditures and deducts from those expenditures related revenues to get you a net cost for a student between pre-K and 5, grades 6 to 12, our special ed in those same breakdowns. So yes, there is a way to do that so you can get a net cost. And then there's also the in that question also it says also is pre-K paid for by district or by the state. Our pre-K budget is about $2.7 million. We get $654,000 in state aid. It doesn't show up in the general fund. It shows up in the special revenue fund. As a matter of fact, since we are on this page, you can actually see it on page 65. I guess that's where you're asking the question under an interfund transfer. What we do is we transfer the actual cost of the for the general fund. So it's that $2,084,000 plus the $654,000 that we get from the state to give you your entire amount for pre-K. If you go to, if you don't have it with you, but our preliminary budget booklet on page 94 gives you a breakdown of our pre-kindergarten program. So the program cost in its entirety, or what we're budgeting for in 21-22, which is 16 classes, 7 full, 2 half, and it comes to $2,739,000, of which the $2,084,000 comes from our taxpayers and $654,324 comes from the state. Unfortunately, that $654,000 has been a flat amount of money. It does not reflect the increases in that area, but like any state aid, we are grateful to get it. Hopefully it does not disappear, and it does help to offset the cost of running that program.
Mrs. Langell?
No further questions, Mrs. Berkowitz.
Okay.
Mrs. Langell, do you want to ask? There were 2 other questions that I think they were not directly budget related, but there could be a connection to conversations and budget questions that were asked this morning. I think there was something with regard to COVID cases. Could you read that question for us, please?
Sure. Is it possible to say how many students' families were affected by positive COVID cases or loss?
Yeah. So what I can say is, we've spoken all morning about the impact of COVID on our school budget, and you've heard throughout this entire presentation the variety of budget lines and the costs associated with supporting our schools in this world of COVID. We do send out to our parents almost on a daily basis, unfortunately, any reported COVID cases with regards to students or district employees. New York State does keep what's called a COVID report card that would also identify children under the age of 18 that are of school age that reside in Great Neck, but may attend schools outside of the Great Neck public schools. But it would not be possible for me to be able to acknowledge, when you think about families that are directly or indirectly related to COVID, with an actual finite number.
Okay, I believe there are 2 non-budget related questions, if I may.
Yes, thank you.
Address those. Okay, one of them says, thank you for addressing this Atlanta tragedy. This is heartbroken to Asians and to all who love peace and inclusion. Many parents are overwhelmed and many kids are confused and hurt. This has been a series of Asian hate events on the rise nationwide. Many organizations, temples, politicians, companies, and different groups have sent out statements to stop Asian hate. We strongly feel that a statement condemning the Asian hate and promote respect and love from our Board of Ed is urgently needed at this moment. Please advise when this letter can be sent. And a similar comment, the recent trend of hate crimes against Asians peaked with the mass shooting in Atlanta is heart-wrenching and disturbing to say the least. President Biden yesterday said, we have to speak out, we have to act, because silence is complicity. What does the district have to say about the gruesome shootings and the worrisome trend? Racism is real in America, and Great Neck is part of America. Thank you.
I'll take that first.
Okay, then Mrs. Berkowitz, and I also have something to say as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before we end, I just want to repeat one thing that was said earlier, that those who logged on later. We've discussed this amongst ourselves, but today is the first opportunity to be before you and say that we're all devastated at the events that occurred this week in Atlanta. Just as we were outraged at the events in Pittsburgh and Squirrel Hill over 3 years ago, we are sickened by what's been happening to Asians now in this country. Please know, and I speak for my colleagues as well, that our hearts are broken by these senseless murders and attacks. And if your children need help coping with these events, please know that our schools have guidance counselors and nurses and psychologists and social workers, as well as access to outside professionals. Please reach out if we can be of help in any way. There is no room for hate in any of our schools, and it will not be tolerated. There will be an email coming out to the community, the school community, on Monday.
Thank you,
You
Mrs.
wanna go
Berkowitz.
next? Dr. Prendergast, do you want to go next?
Yes, if you don't mind, and I do want to also reiterate Mrs. Berkowitz's comments, and I thank the Board of Education for that. The reality is the rise of racism and violence against the Asian American community is indeed heart-wrenching, and it's absolutely unacceptable. The Great Neck Public School District is unwavering in its stance against any form of racism and discrimination, and we remain committed to cultivating a culture in our schools through our academic, social, and emotional programs that embraces diversity and inclusion for everyone. As Don Ashkenaz has said many, many times, and I know you could possibly reiterate his words, the diversity is the strength of America, and it is what we are most proud of in the Great Neck Public Schools, and we will continue to work and are committed to making sure that we have a culture of respect in all of our schools so that our children can feel welcomed, safe, and accepted by everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody, our next board meeting will be on Wednesday, April 7th at 7:30. And I wish you all a lovely holiday and spring break, and please stay safe. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.